Hey everybody, it's Mr. Wyatt again, and today we are looking at section 2 from topic 6. We're relating fractions, decimals, and percents. We have a lot to cover today, a lot of ground today, because we're going to be moving between these different forms. All three of these forms, fractions, decimals, and percents, are ways that we can express a part of a whole. If you don't have the whole thing, how do you express just a part of it? Well, you can use a fraction, you can use a decimal, you can use a percent. So look at this grid here. It has some different colors in it. The grid is shaded with blue, orange, and yellow. What part of the grid is shaded blue? So I'm looking at the blue tiles here and I figure, all right, I have to count them up. And looking at it, I see a couple of ways that I could count them up. One way is I can see, the blues go along the diagonal here and the blues go along the diagonal here. So I could just count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And guess what? It'll be 10 this way too. So we have 20 blue tiles here. And let's actually get a pen so I can write. We have 20 blue tiles. And look at that. I'm using my blue marker today because you matter and I care about you. All right, so anyway, we have 20 blue tiles, and if you count up, you'll see it's a 10 by 10 grid, which means if it's a 10 by 10 grid, that means we have 10 squared, right? Because we're filling in this entire square. We have 100 squares altogether. So it's 20 blue out of 100 squares. All right, so what part of the grid is shaded blue? 20 out of 100. Now, we talked yesterday about how percent means per 100, so I could express this and say we have 20% of the grid that is shaded blue. That's one way I could write it. Or I could take my fractional form here and I could simplify it by dividing the top and bottom both by 20. I haven't mentioned this to you in a while, but when you're dividing the top and the bottom of a fraction by the same value, you're actually dividing by 20 out of 20, which is the same thing as dividing by one whole. And if you divide by one whole, are you going to change its value? Nope. You're just going to change its form in which it's written. 20 divided by 20 is 1. 100 divided by 20 is 5. So we could say 20% of the grid is shaded blue. 1/5 of the grid is shaded blue. And if you want to write this as a decimal portion of the grid, the easiest way is to take your 20%. Your decimal point isn't shown, so it must be at the end of the number. To change percents to decimals, just move the decimal point left 2 spaces, which is the same as dividing by 100, and we get 0.20. Or I could just write 0.2. Okay. Now, another way to look at this is if you have 20 out of 100, well, couldn't you write 20 and make sure the 0 lands in the hundredths place in your decimals, and you'd have 20 out of 100. You could write it like this, but again, we don't need to show the 0 at the end of a decimal if there are no other non-zero numbers after it. Okay, so I think, honestly, counting the blue squares is almost like the trickiest part of this whole problem. Hey, I did the diagonals last time and figured, well, 10 and 10. We could also have looked, some of you might have looked here and said, well, there are 4 there, and then there are 4, 4, 4, and 4. And so you just figured, okay, I have 4 times 5, which is 20 blue squares. You could look at it that way too. All right, anyway, a percent is a ratio that compares a number to 100. Percent literally means per 100. Cent, as I mentioned yesterday, again, that means 100. So write each percent as a fraction in simplest form. Well, since percent means per 100, if I have 36%, I can just write 36 out of 100. And I guess I'm good. I have my fraction now, don't I? Mission accomplished. Oh, but wait, there's more. This is not in simplest terms. Can you simplify 36 over 100? And, I'm going to write it down here a couple of times. And I'll explain why here shortly. Some of you might look at these and recognize right away, hey, I know the greatest common factor is 4. I could divide these both by 4. 4 goes into both 36 and 100. 36 divided by 4 is 9. 100 divided by 4 is 25. Dunzos! Others might be thinking, well, I don't know if I would have recognized that 4 went into both. So you would have divided them both by 2. Ain't no big thing, chicken wang. 36 divided by 2 is 18. 100 divided by 2 is 50. But you'll notice here they are both still even, so let's divide them both by 2 again. 18 divided by 2 is 9. 50 divided by 2 is 25. You see, we ended up getting to the same place, 9/25 for our fraction. It just took an extra step this way since we didn't divide by the greatest common factor right away. Okay, now let's do the same thing with 8%. If I want to write it as a fraction, again, percent just means per 100. So I'm just going to take 8 and write 8 per 100, 8 out of 100. Now, let's simplify this one. Now, again, you can divide these both by 2, but I bet we can divide them both by 4. 8 divided by 4 is 2. 100 divided by 4 is 25. And there is my fraction, 2 out of 25. Super simple, right? All right, now if you want to convert a percent into a decimal, here's the trick. To change a percent into a decimal, move the decimal point 2 spaces to the left. Okay, so 36%, I don't see a decimal point right now. Go away, box. I didn't ask for you. Okay, stay there. We can be friends. Oh, it's gone. All right, so 36%. Currently, the percent, I don't see a decimal point, which means the decimal point must be at the end of the number. Where do I want the decimal point to be? Well, I want to move it 2 spaces to the left. Essentially, every time you move 1 space to the left, you're dividing by 10. So if you move 2 spaces to the left, you're dividing by 10 twice, or dividing by 100, and you get 0.36. So, or I'm going to write 0.36. Okay, 36% is 0.36. So to change percents to a decimal, just move the decimal point left 2 spaces. Here I have 8%. So my decimal point right now is at the end of the number. If I move this 2 spaces to the left, well, 1 space gets me in front of the 8, but I still have to move 1 more space. Well, I can do that. But then what am I going to put in this additional space here? I have to put something there. So I'm going to put a 0 there. And now what I have is 0.08. All the cool cats put a 0 out in front of the decimal point too. So 8% as a decimal is 8 hundredths. Hey, you know what? Percent means per 100. Isn't that interesting that the 8 is in the hundredths place? All right, so that's pretty easy, right? 10%. Oops. Oh boy, I haven't seen those things before. 10%. Again, if I want to change it into a decimal, the decimal point isn't shown, so I know it's at the end of the number. Just move 2 spaces left, whoop, and I get 0.10, or I can just put 0.1, and I'll put a 0 in front of the decimal point. 0.1. Hey, look at this one, 0.5%. That is like 1/2 of 1%. That's pretty small. Again, if I want to change it into decimal form, I just move the decimal point to the left 2 spaces. Uh-oh, I need to put a 0 here, don't I? And then I get 0.005. I'm going to put a 0 in front of the decimal point as well. There it is as a decimal, 5 thousandths. Oh, by the way, if you wanted to change the decimal back into a percent, then I bet you could guess what you'd need to do. Just move the decimal point back to the right back to the right 2 spaces. Yeah. All right, so that's what we're going to do right now. Write these decimals as fractions and as percents. Let's do the easy part first. Change them into percents by moving this decimal point back to the right 2 spaces. And that gives us 40%. Now, once you have the percent, it's pretty easy to change into a fraction. That would be 40 per 100. And then you just simplify this, and you could divide these both by 20. Come on now. Oh, you dirty dog. I can divide by 20. And we get 2 over 5 for our fraction. Now, some people would say, well, point 0.4, isn't the 4 in the tenths place? Yeah, it is. So you could write 4 tenths. And guess what? When you divide these both by 2, guess what you get? You get 2/5 again. So we have lots of ways we can do this, but really with the decimals, I kind of like changing them into percents first. Look at 0.45, 45 hundredths. Hey, I could write that as a fraction, 45 hundredths. Hey, percent means per 100. That's going to be 45%, right? But remember, all you have to do to change a decimal to a percent is move that decimal point to the right 2 spaces, and we get 45%. Okay. By the way, we still need to simplify 45 over 100. They are both multiples of 5, so I'm going to divide them both by 5. And I end up with 9 out of 20. This is pretty easy. It's new, but it's not too bad, especially when you get the hang of it. 6 hundredths to change a decimal into a percent, just do this. Move the decimal point to the right 2 spaces. That's 6%. As a fraction, what would that be? Well, 6 hundredths can be written like this, 6 out of 100. I can simplify that by dividing these both by 2. I get 3 out of 50. I know I'm going kind of fast here, but again, I did say we had a lot of ground to cover today. So you can always go back and review some of these if you wish. I'm going to jump ahead here because of time. I don't think I have time to reveal what's behind that screen. All right, what about if I start with a fraction? How do I write that as a decimal and as a percent? You know, you can change any fraction into a decimal if you just remember that fractions, they're division problems. Yeah, the fraction bar means divide. This literally means 1 divided by 2. I can do that, 1 divided by 2. But 2 is bigger than 1. That's okay. It'll give us a decimal, which is what I want, a decimal. So I'm going to put a decimal point here and add a 0. 2 will not go into 1. I'll put a 0 there. I bring my decimal point straight up. 2 does go into 10. 5 times. Exactly 5 times. And I get a remainder of 0. So as a decimal, it's 0.5. Hey, I bet some of you knew 1/2 and 0.5 were the same thing. Of course, now that we have 0.5, we can move this 2 spaces to the right to change it into a percent, and we get 50%. Or you could go from 1/2 to writing an equivalent fraction out of 100, because that's what percent means, per 100. 2 times 50 is 100. 1 times 50 is 50 out of 100, which is 50%. Okay? 3/5, similar kind of a deal here. If you want to make it a decimal, just divide. Divide 3 by 5. I'm actually going to make it a percent first because I think I can rewrite this out of 100. And I can because 5 times 20 is equal to 100. Do that to the numerator. 3 times 20 is 60. 60 out of 100 is 60%. All right, we have our percent. Now, once you have your percent, it's pretty easy to change to a decimal. Find the decimal point. It's not shown, so I know it's at the end of the number. Move it 2 spaces to the left. Whoop, whoop. We get 0.60. But I don't have to show that 0. I can just write 0.6. Oh, the cool cats put a 0 in front of the decimal point, though. So 0.6, 6 tenths, is the same thing as 60 out of 100, or 60%. Oh my golly, I don't know if I have time to do another one. If you see 3/8, the problem with this one is if you want to rewrite it out of 100, 8 and 100 are not very compatible. They don't work well together. So what I would do on one like this is just divide 3 by 8. Okay? I'm going to put a decimal point here. I'll add some zeros. And just because we don't have a lot of time, I'll just tell you it's 0.375, okay? Which is 37.5.